friends, welcome back to my kitchen. If you're new here, my name is Jen and I do cooking and canning recipes and sometimes I post garden content. If that seems like the sort of thing that you'd be into, I hope you'll consider subscribing and sticking around. Today I'm going to show you how to make the best sandwich on the planet, and that is a Cuban sandwich or a cubano. So this is going to start the night before. You're going to take a 4 to 5 pound butt roast. It can be bone in or bone out, whichever you prefer. And you're going to mix up this delicious marinade for this butt roast. And we're just going to let this thing cook low and slow all night long. Now, I am going to say that even if you don't try these Cuban sandwiches, I highly recommend you try this pork roast because the pork roast itself is absolutely amazing and it has fantastic flavor. So even if you don't want to make the sandwiches, maybe try this pork roast. I promise you will not regret it. So I'm going to get started by juicing 3 or 4 navel oranges. And as you can see here, these are pretty big and I did struggle a little bit. I lacked the hand strength to get these things going. I don't have a reamer or a regular juicer, so we're just on the struggle bus. We're going to do it by hand, but if you don't have fresh oranges or limes, that's quite all right. You can use the bottled stuff, but fresh is always better if you have access to it. So this is going to be the juice from about 3 decent sized limes. And the acid in the fruit not only adds flavor to this meat, but it also helps to kind of tenderize and break down those tough fibers of the pork roast. So I also have a handful of garlic here. You can add as much as you like. I would suggest at least 5 cloves of minced garlic directly into that orange juice and lime juice that we have here. And if you don't have any fresh garlic, I would just suggest a teaspoon or 2 of some garlic powder or some granulated garlic. Now to this, I'm also going to add 2 heaping tablespoons of cumin. I really enjoy the flavor of cumin, so hence the heaping tablespoons. But if you don't like the cumin so much, you can scale that back a little bit. I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of dried oregano to this as well. And as with anything else I tell you the recipe for, season it to taste. If any of these things you aren't fond of, scale it back. If you like it a lot, add more. Like the cayenne pepper, for example, I'm adding 2 teaspoons. For some folks, that might be too much. So, if you're not into heat at all, maybe substitute the cayenne pepper for a little smoked paprika or regular paprika. That would be perfectly acceptable. And as always, I will list the recipe and the ingredient amounts down below in the description box. And the last 2 ingredients I'm going to add is 2 teaspoons of ground black pepper and 2 teaspoons of kosher salt. Salt and pepper are always to taste. If you prefer more salt, by all means, you can add more salt, but I highly recommend that you wait until your roast is done and give it a taste before you add more salt. So I'm just going to give that a really good mix together, and I'm going to pour that directly over my pork roast in my largest crock pot. When you put your butt roast in your crock pot, you want to put it fat cap up. And as this cooks, that fat is going to melt down and go down into the meat and just make it delicious. So fat cap up and pour your marinade over. Now all that's left to do is put the lid on the crock pot and turn it to low and tuck it in for the night because I'm going to let this cook all night long and into the afternoon the next day. If you need this in a hurry, you can cook this on high for about half the amount of time, but I think low and slow is really the way to go with this. So just be patient and leave it alone and let it do its thing. Now this is what it looked like the next day. This was after about 10 hours of cooking on low. I hadn't fiddled with it at all, but as you can see, it is quite tender and fall apart ready. So I, at this point, am not ready to make dinner. So all I'm going to do is switch this off and put the lid back on it and scoot it out of the way until I'm ready to make my sandwiches. So it's been quite a bit later and my crock pot does hold on to heat for a long time. So this roast, see the steam, is still hot at about 6 p.m. when I'm cooking dinner. And it is so tender that when I went to try to take the bone out, the bone actually started to fall apart. So I'm just going to pull this bone out carefully. And then I'm going to shred the rest of this pork roast right inside of all of those cooking juices and that marinade in the bottom of the pan. This is going to do two things. It's going to keep your roast from drying out, and it's going to let this pork kind of soak up some more of those flavors from the marinade itself. Now you're exposing the center of the roast to all those juices, and they are going to just suck in all of that flavor. So definitely don't drain off the cooking liquid. Just shred your pork roast directly into it, which at this point should take very minimal effort. As you can see here, I'm just using a fork, barely pushing it around, and it's falling apart. Now for this, I'm using a sandwich press, but if you do not have a sandwich press, don't panic. There's a couple of ways you can do this. You can wrap your sandwich in foil and press it between two very heavy pans or two cast iron skillets. And if you decide that you want to do it this way, you're just going to use a pot holder inside the top one and just keep continuous pressure on your sandwich. And you'll need to flip it over about halfway to make sure both sides get crispy. Now for this, you will either need a large loaf of Italian bread or a loaf of Cuban bread if you have access to that sort of thing. I didn't have access to Cuban bread, so this large Italian loaf will do just fine. So all I'm going to do is trim the ends of it off and split this right down the center. And then I'm going to toast the top and bottom bun on my sandwich press just so that when I start to add the rest of the condiments, the bread doesn't go soggy. So earlier in the day, I whipped up a big batch of garlic butter. It's just a couple sticks of softened butter, and I used garlic powder, but if you want to mince in some fresh garlic, you absolutely can do that. But I'm going to add this butter to one side of my bun here. And I'm going to make sure that I get it all the way to the edges. I'm not going to be shy about it. This sandwich is kind of over the top, and I'm actually making this one right here for my husband, and he loves these things. So I'm going to load this sandwich up. When you make yours, you do not have to be so extra about it. But when you cook for the ones you love, you always want them to be happy. So this sandwich is definitely going to be extra. Now, on my other piece of bread, I'm going to add plain old yellow mustard. Yes, like the French's. And I'm going to spread it out to make sure all of the bread gets just a little bit of mustard. I am not really sure if, you could use brown mustard, I guess, if it's your sandwich. If you want to use spicy brown, you could use spicy brown. But as far as I am aware, Cuban sandwiches is just plain yellow mustard. But it's your sandwich. Make it the way you like it. So now we can go ahead and start assembling our sandwich. And I'm going to start by putting a few slices of Swiss cheese down on the mustard side. And really, I don't imagine that it matters what order you put these in, but I'm just trying to make it look nice for you. So this is how we're doing it today. Now on top of that Swiss cheese, I'm going to add a fair amount of that pork roast that we made the night before. And as you can see, it is still warm. You don't want this roast to be cold because it's going to make it take a really long time to heat the center of your sandwich. So it doesn't have to be piping hot like this, but at least lukewarm. Um, the thing about this bread is, especially if you're using a sandwich press, is that if your sandwich press has to work for a really long time to melt your cheese and heat the center of your sandwich, your bread is probably going to burn. So just make sure that that pork roast has at least been popped in the microwave if you made it in advance. So then I'm going to add another layer of Swiss cheese to this. And then we're going to put a ton of pickles on this. I guess if you're not a pickle lover, you can kind of scale back the pickles or just leave them off. But I think it's really important. The pickles go really well with the mustard. So I went ahead and bought these stacker pickles because I wanted to make sure that every bite of this sandwich that my husband had a bite of pickle. So I am just being really liberal with these pickles. And I'm going to put like 4 of them on here. And then on top of my pickles, I'm going to add some Black Forest ham. Again, you don't have to add this much. This is just literally lunch meat. Now, if you have the fancy, deli ham or actual ham, like if you went above and beyond and made an actual ham, that would be so amazing on this sandwich. But I had Black Forest ham, so that is what I'm using. Just put as much ham on here as you would like to eat. And then I'm going to finish it up with another layer of Swiss cheese. And I'm going to put my top bread on and hope that I can get this onto my sandwich press without it falling apart. Now, if you're not using a sandwich press, when you roll this up in aluminum foil, I suggest to roll it really tightly. That will help keep your sandwich together when you're smashing it down. As you can see here, when I first put my sandwich on, it wouldn't go down very far. So every now and then I just come back and I press it down, and then I come back again and I press it down. And I'm gonna let this cook until the bread is nice and crispy. So when your sandwich is nice and flat and your cheese is all melty and your bread sounds nice and crispy, you're ready to eat this sandwich. Now there's a lot of different ways you can serve this, but in my opinion, the best way to have this sandwich is just with some plain old potato chips, either ruffled chips or kettle chips, nothing with any fancy flavors, because why would you want your chips to overshadow this amazing sandwich that you took 2 days to put together? So I really hope that you give this a try. And, if you don't want to make a pork roast specifically for making sandwiches, if you don't want to be extra, it's fine. It's not a big deal. You can just save some back next time you make a pork roast and pop it in the freezer for Cuban sandwiches. So I really hope that you give this sandwich a try. And if you do, come back and leave me a comment and let me know. Is this not the best sandwich on the planet? I think it is, and so does my husband. Until next time, friends, happy cooking.